Everyday Samurai, Episode 15. Greetings, friends, and welcome to Everyday Samurai, in service to your liberty and the security of a free state. Today we're exploring patterns of human behavior at both the individual and social level to understand indications of aggression. Once again, we reference Sun Tzu's Art of War, or Sonshi no Heiho in Japanese, where victory is determined by calculation in the temple well before any battle takes place. Where subjugating an opponent without fighting signifies the highest excellence, and warrior skill is demonstrated not through pitched battles and arduous struggle, but through setting the conditions for victory well in advance of actual combat. Such that, as we read in Chapter 4, verses 7 through 9, quote, "Winning battles such that the whole world cries, 'Excellent,' is not the highest excellence. For lifting a pillow is not considered great strength. Seeing the sun and the moon is not considered a sign of sharp vision. Hearing thunder is not considered a sign of sensitive hearing. The victory of those skilled in warfare are easily gained, because they are uncomplicated. They bring neither fame for great wisdom nor merit for valor." Close quote. Is this your approach to martial arts training? Can you see how this muted approach to victory might appear totally unsatisfying to someone conditioned by a society accustomed to giant ticker tape parades, gaudy gold championship belts, and the arrogant gloating found in things ranging from competitive sport fighting, drunken bar brawls, as well as international wars? I'm immediately reminded of the macabre haughtiness of Hillary Clinton laughing at the horrific death of Libya's Muammar Gaddafi following 2011's Operation Odyssey Dawn, a military misadventure I had a front row seat in. Toppling a head of state and knowing that he was unceremoniously sodomized to death in the desert of his own country, and then rejoicing with a chant of, "We came, we saw, he died," only shows bad taste, invites resentment, and propagates dishonorable norms in the conduct of war. Unlike the bureaucrat-led Hague and Geneva conventions that reinforce industrialized war, replete with mass attacks on non-combatants, a preference for frontal assaults and protracted quagmires, largely unwritten warrior honor codes were developed to prevent excessive destruction and unnecessary loss of life. This is not to say that atrocities did not take place, far from it. As we've explored in previous episodes, the example of Taira no Masakado and his failed attempt to establish a separate empire in eastern Japan in late 939 AD involved the destruction of villages and the ransacking of private residences. Undoubtedly, non-combatants suffered losses, and lives and properties under Masakado were destroyed, to be sure. However, warrior alliances at that time involved peasants or farmers living together under the protection of a warrior inside walled and moated compounds in a quasi-corporate structure. To get to an enemy warrior's house at that time involved attacking through civilian areas to get to the citadel in the center of the compound. The legitimate military objective, in a sense, used peasant housing as a protective buffer. Peasants were also drafted as foot soldiers or ashigaru, or attendants to surround the mounted and armored warrior. There was no distinction between combatant and non-combatant within the walls of these private warrior compounds. Later in the evolution of samurai warfare, leaders took it upon themselves to make the ultimate sacrifice so that others under their protection could live. For instance, during the height of the Sengoku Jidai, Japan's Warring States era, and the golden age of samurai and ninja, the warlord Toyotomi Hideyoshi was waging a campaign in the west against the Mori clan. The Toyotomi forces were laying siege to the strategic Takamatsu Castle when Hideyoshi received word by secret courier that his lord Oda Nobunaga had been attacked and killed by another of his generals, the traitorous Akechi Mitsuhide. Knowing he needed to quickly avenge his master and defeat Akechi, Hideyoshi negotiated a settlement with the Mori clan whereby they would maintain the future of their clan, most of its holdings, and some relative autonomy by sacrificing Takamatsu Castle. Therefore, Shimizu Minohara, the garrison commander, performed seppuku for all to see so that the rest of the inhabitants could survive. And there's a big difference between the customs of war when managed by those with skin in the game versus those far removed from the reality of battle. Those who do not feel the ramifications of a policy are wanton in their approach and careless toward unintended consequences. This is why policy needs to be set by those who will feel the impact of those decisions. You and I, or anyone that is responsible for their own security, face these decisions on a daily basis. This is why Igen Sho describes policy as one of the general principles of all martial art. And by the way, you can get a complimentary PDF outline of Igen Sho when you go to everydaysamurai.life/dignity. Of course, you'll benefit even greater by owning the whole book, but the outline acts as a quick reference and gives you enough context to see how this 6-principle program fits into an integrated system of living the martial way. If you haven't yet done so, get your copy of the outline today at everydaysamurai.life/dignity. So, speaking of policy and informed by Sun Tzu's criteria of a skilled warrior, again, those that achieve victory by first setting conditions for success, we can then discuss the importance of recognizing patterns of behavior that indicate whether we will be successful in securing for ourselves and our posterity the blessings of liberty, that is, the full enjoyment of our lives and property, the growth of intergenerational wealth, and an ever more peaceful and prosperous world. Taking once again the example of the Libya intervention and regime change, hostile heads of state have learned that there can be no parley with Western powers, and their survival cannot be allowed for when negotiating in this way. The toppling of regimes has meant annihilation for leaders including Hosni Mubarak in Egypt, Saddam Hussein in Iraq, or Slobodan Milosevic in Serbia. This pattern of total destruction without any possibility of exile has undoubtedly been noticed by other leaders and regimes around the world, and has led to further undermining of good faith negotiations. Muammar Gaddafi renounced his weapons of mass destruction programs and opened his country to international inspections. A few years later, he was sodomized with a bayonet until being finished off with a bullet to the head. Russian leader Vladimir Putin reportedly was so incensed by watching the cell phone footage of Gaddafi's demise that he vowed to never let anything like that happen again to one of his allies. This is manifested as strong Russian military and diplomatic support for the al-Assad regime in Syria, prolonging the fighting there and increasing contentiousness with great possibility of spillover effects into larger international relations. The absurdity of simultaneously backing Islamic State-affiliated groups fighting Assad in Syria, while also striking against Islamic State groups in Iraq, cannot be overstated. The widespread destruction and ongoing conflict in the artificially carved nation-states of Mesopotamia and the Levant directly contradicts everything Sun Tzu advised in The Art of War. More than just being a waste of resources and the height of folly, it demonstrates a pattern of behavior that signals danger to onlooking observers. The hostile regimes in Iran, North Korea, and Venezuela will certainly not step down or quietly retire. They will fight to the bitter end and at all costs rather than face brutal extinction. One need not be a fan or even an apologist for the likes of Gaddafi, Mubarak, Hussein, Milosevic, Assad, or Kim Jong-un to recognize that toppling their regimes, let alone spending years and billions of tax dollars for zero returns toward American security, is foolish. The consequences of these efforts are actually much more counterproductive, and I'll offer a clear example of how pattern recognition offered a change in tactics. The 1990 to 1991 campaigns of Desert Shield and Desert Storm against Saddam Hussein's Iraq, sometimes known as Gulf War I, was an overwhelming victory for the coalition forces. One can remember or easily find on the internet pictures of the famous Highway of Death, where Iraqi forces were laid to waste on the road as they were fleeing from occupied Kuwait. The US-led coalition was successful at expelling Iraqi forces from the Kuwaiti kingdom, and at the same time displayed the American military power in a way that hasn't been seen since the conclusion of hostilities in Vietnam in 1972. The world watched with amazement, and hearkening back to Sun Tzu, many cried, "Excellent." Strategic competitors like Russia and China witnessed these ostentatious displays of war-making capabilities, along with the end-zone dancing afterwards, and realized they needed to remake their strategic calculations. Clawing their ways out of the poverty of their communist pasts, China and Russia planners knew their countries could never match the conventional military power of the United States. They began to think differently about how to contend with the American Leviathan. Two colonels in the Chinese People's Liberation Army wrote about this conundrum in an academic paper that would later be published as a book titled Unrestricted Warfare. The core element of their theory is asymmetric approaches, to no longer consider direct engagement with U.S. forces as an option, for much other than a distraction. They have, in essence, expounded upon Sun Tzu's dictum to engage with the conventional but achieve victory through the unconventional. Chinese planners are now thinking about cyber attacks, banking and financial system disruptions, anti-satellite and area denial systems that allow for degrading U.S. advantages prior to or instead of any direct clashes. Like China, Russia is also investing in anti-ship missiles and hypersonic projectiles that can evade U.S. radars and countermeasures. They are also developing camouflage technologies or systems deployable from common shipping containers so that the lines between military and commercial transportation will further blur, likely leading to greater civilian casualties. We've talked previously about the importance of a high-trust society for building prosperity and a peaceful social order. In the quest for upholding universal values based on respect for people and their property, which are the bedrock prerequisites of building peace and prosperity, one crucial objective is to integrate the international division of labor and allow for the free flow of capital and goods. Individual property rights, the rule of law, and free markets are the surest way of raising living standards for everyone. And in order to confidently do business at even greater distances, one must have trust in the institutions of justice in these foreign territories. Similarly, those seeking external investment and business opportunities must demonstrate their trustworthiness, again, signified by respect for property rights, the rule of law, and unhampered trade. The relationship is symbiotic, and the human desires or self-interests on behalf of both parties is the driving force that incentivizes forthright and trustworthy behavior. I'll offer an example from a trip to Romania. I was really surprised at how overt the people there were at showing they were honest in their business dealings. When I bought some uniquely scented soap from a street vendor, they absolutely refused my offer to let them keep the change. This same vehement denial of gratuities was repeated all throughout my trip. The common people of Romania wanted me to know that they were above board, so much because they were escaping their communist past and reputation for corruption. To be sure, the Romanian government has highly entrenched politicians and special interest groups linked to organized crime. All governments do. However, the Romanian people that I met were exceedingly diligent at conveying their trustworthiness, and I would gladly go back there. So why does this matter? Well, as foreign leaders, bad actors though they may be, get the message that they cannot negotiate with the will of the American hegemon and cannot compete against the American military juggernaut, they are driven towards asymmetric, unconventional methods, including, as we've seen, attacks on the financial system. Not only does this mean more probes and penetrations of traditionally non-combatant systems, but civilian activities will be more frequently mixed, military equipment or actions, and leading to even greater disruptions of commercial activity when hostilities arise. No longer will combat be the arena of professional warriors, but civilians will be increasingly mixed into the targeting packages. And this has been a fact of history with increasing frequency since industrialization. Business operations will be destroyed or at least subject to greater scrutiny and enhanced screening when crossing borders. Stunting satisfaction of consumer demand heightens agitation and social strife. Increased restrictions on the flow of products and services brings the axiom to mind that when goods do not cross borders, armies will. From this pattern of behavior, we can reasonably expect conflict to increase, even if, as the Chinese colonels have suggested, the battles are in unconventional arenas. Now, predictive analysis is not an exact science. History is not predetermined, and the future of humanity remains full of possibility. However, we would be foolish to not use our faculties to notice patterns that tend to result in harmful consequences. As Sun Tzu wrote in Chapter 3 of The Art of War, quote, "One who knows the enemy and knows himself will not be in danger in 100 battles." Close quote. At the personal level, it means that you become adept at recognizing pre-attack signals predators and criminals exhibit. You get deliberately observant, noticing eye movements, watching hands, because that's where most weapons are deployed from. You notice how shoulders tend to rise and attackers move to the balls of their feet just before they strike. You listen for rising voice pitch. If you're dealing with multiple potential adversaries, you are watching their body language for subtle communication and other furtive movements. I remember going through the police academy in South Florida. I later on attended the Federal Law Enforcement Training Center, but this video of gang members in Florida left a deep impression on me. It was footage of gang members caught in a schoolyard or a parking lot, I can't remember exactly where, but it was just before they attacked a school resource officer. Once you learned the code of their internal communication system, you could clearly see that they were signaling each other with hand gestures, and the way that they tugged on their clothing or nodded their heads. There was a definite setup phase where the members surrounded the officer at a distance before the attack signal was given. Thankfully, the officer survived in this case, but there are plenty of instances out there, people and law enforcement or not, that suffer tremendously from remaining oblivious to the discernible patterns of behavior that indicate hostile intent. To overcome this, you need to become a diligent observer of your environment, to the people around you and the human behavior in general. Awareness is the key to much of what makes for a successful life. You can find a number of attacks caught on video, particularly on Facebook and YouTube these days, and I would highly recommend looking at Active Self-Protection, a site that breaks down a lot of actual attack situations with some tips and lessons learned. Of course, you need to make your own evaluations, don't just rely on someone else's opinion, but Active Self-Protection, or ASP, is a good collection point of attack videos from around the web. Sun Tzu also said in Chapter 13 of The Art of War that what enables an enlightened ruler and good general to achieve success is foreknowledge. So understanding these patterns of behavior early in the attack cycle is crucial to prevailing over aggression. And this is equally true at the individual level, just as much as the communal or social level. You can apply foreknowledge to just about every area of your life, and the best way to acquire foreknowledge that will help you be successful is through the transferred experience of others. That's why Sun Tzu focused on acquiring so many different types of spies. And that's also why I suggest you look at ASP for learning about real-world attacks. But most of us are not being physically attacked every day, and we all have other aspirations in life, or at least I hope you do. That's why I highly recommend you get a success coach, and there is no better way than taking a daily success vitamin first thing in the morning. That's what 6 Minutes to Success is all about. It's a short video you can watch every day with an important lesson and exercise for you to do that sets you on a glide path towards living the kind of life that you want to lead. So check out everydaysamurai.life/success today to see how you can program your mindset through daily doses of motivation and inspiration. Hey, if there is anything in your life that you want to improve, whether it's your health, relationships, finances, or business, you've got to start thinking and acting differently. This is the surest way to help you start living on purpose. The secret to massive gains is really about doing a little bit every day. Do yourself the service of adopting a success mindset with expert guidance. I'll see you in the members area. Go to www.everydaysamurai.life/success. Now, I'm going to share with you a short piece by political economist Jeffrey Rogers Hummel, who described how patterns of increasing state intervention and authoritarian control are embedded in history. Moreover, the march towards tyranny can be witnessed in prototype form during earlier periods. Indeed, every deviation from the original principles of forming of a government, at least in the American tradition of securing individual rights on behalf of member states and constituents, creates unintended consequences and calls for more intervention to correct the errors caused by the initial overreach. If people become aware of noticing these patterns early enough, government can be returned to its proper scope and functions, allowing for disaster to be avoided. It's called America's Turning Point. Quote, "War is the health of the state," proclaimed Randolph Bourne, the young progressive disillusioned by the Wilson administration's grotesque excesses during the First World War. Bourne's maxim is true in two respects. During war itself, the government swells in size and power as it taxes, conscripts, regulates, generates inflation, and suppresses civil liberties. Second, after the war ends, there is what economists and historians have identified as a ratchet effect. Post-war retrenchment never returns governments to its pre-war levels. The state has assumed new functions, taken on new responsibilities, and exercised new prerogatives that continue long after the fighting is over. Both of these phenomena are starkly evident during the Civil War. Yet the Civil War did something more. Despite wars and their ratchets, governments must sometimes recede in reach, else all would have been groaning under totalitarian regimes long ago. Both conservatives and liberals date the major political turning point in American history at the Great Depression of 1929. Previously, Americans are supposed to have self-reliantly resisted the temptations of government largesse and confined federal power within strict constitutional limits. Although Franklin D. Roosevelt's New Deal is responsible for Social Security, which now ranks as the national government's primary expense, this legend ignores several inconvenient facts. The New Deal, to begin with, simply emulated the Wilson administration's previous war collectivism. Roosevelt's keystone agency, the National Recovery Administration, was a recreation of the War Industries Board of the First World War. FDR's Agricultural Adjustment Administration was a reactivated wartime food administration. The New Deal's National Labor Relations Board trod the path blazed by Wilson's National War Labor Board and War Labor Policies Board, and the Tennessee Valley Authority grew out of the government-owned nitrate and electric power plants at Muscle Shoals, built under the authority of the 1916 National Defense Act. Moreover, the growth of government under the New Deal was trivial compared to its growth during the United States' next major conflict, World War II. Between 1928 and 1938, annual national expenditures slightly more than doubled, from $3.1 to $6.8 billion. During the Second World War, federal spending peaked at $98.3 billion in 1945. Overall, the national government spent about twice as much while fighting the war as during the preceding 150 years combined. More astute analysts pushed the watershed in U.S. history back to the Progressive era. Progressivism emerged at the beginning of the 20th century as a diverse inclination, varying in different parts of the country and including members of all political parties. But it became the country's first dominant mindset to advocate government intervention over the free market and personal liberty at every level and in every sphere. My contention, however, is that America's decisive transition must be dated even earlier. The Yankee Leviathan co-opted and transformed abolitionism. It shattered the pre-war congruence among anti-slavery, anti-government, and anti-war radicalism. It permanently reversed the implicit constitutional settlement that had made the central and state governments revenue independent. It acquired for central authority such new functions as subsidizing privileged businesses, managing the currency, providing welfare to veterans, and protecting the nation's morals at the very moment that local and state governments were also expanding. And it set dangerous precedents with respect to taxes, fiat money, conscription, and the suppression of dissent. These and other countless changes marked the Civil War as America's real turning point. In the years ahead, coercive authority would wax and wane with year-to-year circumstances, but the long-term trend would be unmistakable. Henceforth, there would be a few major victories of liberty over power. In contrast to the whittling away of government that had preceded Fort Sumter, the United States had commenced its halting but inexorable march toward the welfare-warfare state of today. Close quote. Now, I do not intend to leave off with such a gloomy prognosis. Again, the whole purpose for studying patterns of behavior in this way is to overcome tyranny and find a way to uphold dignity, which is the purpose of martial arts, the enforcement of good government, and Everyday Samurai is studying Japanese martial arts, a success mindset, and the principles of political economy to advance the cause of liberty. Therefore, I will now transition to a possible antidote and a positive vision of available remedies. In the past, we've discussed the importance of the Second Amendment, not just in part, but in its entirety, as a key component of constitutional self-government. Americans are fortunate to have the militia of the several states specifically listed as necessary to the security of a free state, constitutionally tasked with executing the laws, repelling invasions, and suppressing insurrections. With this codification in law at such a fundamental level, it will be much easier to reassert these institutions of local sovereignty. Yet even without a written operating charter, with an understanding of natural law and a desire to be free, any group of people yearning to be free can take action to secure their freedom. With this in mind, I would ask that you suspend all previous judgments you may have about the Middle East, Islam, or the Israel-Palestine conflict. I'm going to share with you something written by geopolitical analyst Richard J. Mayberry, author of the U.S. Early Warning Report. This particular piece comes from his essay called The Thousand-Year War, and if you listen to it with an open mind, solely oriented on examining the model he's describing, I'm sure you'll find some advice for anyone yearning to secure their liberty and dignity. Quote, "A rational defense against the Zionist government's taxes and controls merely would have required the Arabs to follow the example laid down by our Sons of Liberty in the 1765 Stamp Act Rebellion. First, they should have informed the Jewish government that it was welcome to enact all the laws it wanted as long as it didn't try to impose them on Muslims. Then, they should have formed local, independent militias and paid peaceful but armed midnight visits to any bureaucrat foolish enough to enforce the Jewish laws. This would have triggered mass resignations among the Jewish bureaucrats, just as it did among the king's bureaucrats in 1765. There was no need to confront the Jewish government's military forces. Ambushing a bureaucrat here and there is the most it would ever take to make enforcement of taxes and controls very lax. A favorite tactic of the Sons of Liberty was to post notices around a bureaucrat's home warning that anyone who was vigilant in the enforcement of the law would have an accident. Using this strategy, the Arabs would have remained free, even though living in the midst of a Jewish government. Their situation would have been something like that of a Tennessee bootlegger who pays little tax on their liquor because their rifles make revenue agents reluctant to find them. After all, what bureaucrat is going to risk getting shot just for a measly civil service paycheck? Instead, however, the Arabs are so paranoid from centuries of persecution that they've overreacted, forming their own government, the Palestine Liberation Organization, or PLO. They've levied taxes and controls on themselves and tried to wipe out the Jewish government. Imagine what would happen if American bootleggers formed a Tennessee Liberation Organization for the purpose of wiping out the American government. Their farms would be obliterated by paratroopers on search and destroy missions. Their skies would be darkened by helicopter gunships, and their mountain roads would be clogged with tanks. They would never be free. Neither will the Arabs. Having their own government, they are experiencing all the miseries accompanying government. Instead of a few Arab militiamen using 10-cent bullets to shoot an occasional bureaucrat, as Tennessee bootleggers do, the Palestinian Arabs have allied themselves with other Arab governments and gone head-to-head against the Israeli government in massive tank and air battles. In short, the Arabs aren't fighting for liberty, they're fighting for victory. Here's the solution. It was the intention of Jefferson, Madison, and the other founding fathers that when the federal government finally grew powerful enough to threaten the security of the nation, the state and local governments would rise up to stop it. That time has now come. In order to protect our cities from acts of nuclear terrorism invited by the federal government's Mideast interventions, every governor, state legislature, and local official should now demand adoption of the following plan. The plan is based on the principles of 1776, common law, higher authority, and natural rights. These are, after all, universal principles which can yield liberty and prosperity whenever they are applied. The U.S. government should sever all ties with all Islamic governments immediately. See George Washington's farewell address of 1796. The U.S. government should sever all ties with the Israeli government unless the Israeli government adopts total religious freedom. This means any person of any religious persuasion may come and go in the Holy Land as he or she pleases, subject only to those laws on which all major religions agree. These are laws against theft and violence, and laws which preserve contracts. In Thomas Jefferson's words, the interests of society require the observation of those moral precepts only in which all religions agree, for all forbid us to murder, steal, plunder, or bear false witness. These laws will number so few that soon after they are enacted there will be no further work required of the Israeli legislature, and all legal matters can be handled by the Israeli courts, using the procedures of the old common law. The only taxes to be collected in the Holy Land are those necessary for peace officers and courts to enforce the above laws. No one is to have an automatic right to any service, subsidy, or other assistance from the Israeli government, except the peace officers and courts for which he is paying taxes. If schools, hospitals, welfare, military defense, or other public services are desired, supporters of the Jewish government or members of other religious or non-religious groups are free to create their own agencies to produce these services, provided they do not force their projects onto persons who do not share their beliefs. The plan's emphasis on voluntary rather than coercive public services is exactly the direction of the Jews were originally headed before the British government's do-gooder humanitarians started getting people killed. If the plan, or one similar to it, is not adopted soon, or if it fails, there surely will be enough atomic bombs owned by enough Muslim holy warriors that our cities will be in grave peril. In that case, the U.S. government must withdraw completely from the Mideast and declare absolute neutrality. It will not even be able to encourage or prohibit private sales of arms to the Mideast, because any intervention of any kind will make someone angry. It must remain totally aloof to the Mideast. In George Washington's words, detached and distant. Incidentally, if the Soviets fail to disengage from the Mideast, they too will stand a good chance of losing a few cities. Otherwise, I can't see how the state and local governments will have any choice but to secede from the Union. The only way they will be able to save our homeland will be to announce that the federal government no longer represents anyone except itself. The states accept no responsibility for its mistakes. Close quote. And keep in mind that that was written in 1981, when there still was a Soviet Union. But the prescription for liberty is pretty sound, and relying on the common law enforced through common law courts and militia seems to be applicable to anyone at any time, and that's exactly what the principles of the founding of the United States were all about. So friends, we hope you've enjoyed this episode of Everyday Samurai and look forward to seeing you next time. Be sure to subscribe to our feed so as to stay up to date with our latest offerings. If you like what you've heard here, give us a thumbs up or a 5-star review. Share it with a friend or someone you think would benefit from the message. Remember to get our Tactical Pen Basics Manual as a bonus with the purchase of any tactical pen at shop.everydaysamurai.life. You'll get a great tool for your everyday carry and some great info on mindset, training, and tactics as well. That's shop.everydaysamurai.life. Get yours today and carry it with you wherever you go. Until next time, stay sharp, stay aware, and be well.